Rival Stars Horse Racing is a mobile and desktop game being developed by Pickpock Games. It is probably one of the most popular horse games currently on the market, and for good reason. Apart from consistent updates and pretty graphics, they also have motion captured their horse models, making them feel and move like the real thing. And recently they took it a step further, launching the Rival Stars VR, allowing players to now enjoy the game from the VR perspective. I was lucky enough to sit down with the CEO from Rival Stars, Mario, and the following video is that interview. However, due to some technical difficulties, I had to re-record some of my own sections, so I will be chatting in between it, just to keep it nice and flowing. But before we get into that, I would like to thank my Ko-Fi supporters for being more awesome than me finally finishing my dark folklore romance horsebook. I am so very close. Let's get into it.
My name is Mario Winans, and I'm the CEO of Pickpock, which is a developer and publisher based in Wellington, New Zealand, and we are the makers of Rival Stars Horse Racing.
Now, Rival Stars VR is a huge leap from mobile and desktop. What convinced you that this was the right direction? Was it about fulfilling a fantasy horse gamers couldn't get elsewhere?
I think when it comes to the VR market generally, we've always been interested as developers. I think it offers the type of gaming experiences and the types of interactions that you can't get anywhere else. But from a commercial perspective, it's a really hard space to operate in a successful or sustainable way. So for the most part, we've been a little bit shy to move into that space. We have previously ported some of our games across, or added kind of a layer of VR support. But this is certainly the biggest investment that we've made. And part of what made that a lot easier is actually it was Meta themselves that approached us and said, hey, we really love what you're doing in the mobile and console and PC space with your games, in particular, loving Rival Stars Horse Racing. Have you thought about bringing that to VR? So that was a great way for us to kind of, really start thinking about things in a more commercial way rather than a creative way. We already had some ideas about what we might do if the opportunity was to move into that space, and together with Meta sort of worked out a way of approaching things that would take a little bit of risk off the table, bring some Meta funding into the mix, which we're very grateful for. That was really the catalyst. It was really Meta that the fans have to thank for helping it make us easier to make that decision and to jump into that marketplace.
Meta, for those of you who might not know, is MetaQuest, one of the leading creators of VR headsets. As I was going through the internet footage for Rival Stars VR, I noted there was an absolute delight from players who could pet the horses and take care of them. This clearly dug into a fantasy that horse gamers seem to have been hankering for. Mario noted that around 50% of their player base actually do own or ride horses, and the fact that they wanted more was quite amazing. But it does create a problem. In order to play a VR, you need a good PC and a VR headset, both of which can be very expensive. Maybe not as expensive as a real horse, but still expensive. Do you think that the entry point for VR is perhaps a little steep?
Yeah, I think historically that is definitely true. I think it has been one of the main limiting factors in growth for VR and VR gaming. I think that it's a high price point, and also, especially in the past, setting up that hardware, finding the space to make it work, getting all the drivers working, all the sensors, whatever it might be. You really have to have been an enthusiast. Things have improved as the technology has improved, as setups have improved, as we've kind of moved from a place where you needed external sensors to the sensors mostly being based within the headset itself. And I think one of the really big changes that we've seen that has kind of broken open the market a little bit more is the MetaQuest headset ecosystem and hardware line that they've released. So, obviously not as capable as having a high-end PC with a high-end headset, but for hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars, You can get a standalone headset that will allow you to play VR immersive games. And, I will say that most of our sales for the game have come from users with the MetaQuest hardware and those standalone headsets. And it's actually a much smaller proportion of players that have that PC VR headset set up. So I think it is definitely more accessible. It still costs several $100,000 to get a MetaQuest headset, so it's not a toy. It's about the equivalent of buying a modern console. But it is within reach, and the experience of setting it up and purchasing games or apps or downloading demos, very user friendly these days.
Mario goes on to make the very fair point that in 2023, over 20 million MetaQuest headsets had been sold worldwide. PlayStation 5, just for context, sold 50 million copies in 2023. He also says that within those who bought the VR headset, there are a lot of people who are actually enjoying their horse game. The issue that I had with the extension into VR was that on the one extreme they were developing a mobile game, and on the other they had VR, which are two completely different types of markets and people you have to market for. And Mario does dive into that aspect a little.
I think too, part of what we needed to think about was, who exactly were we going to be selling a horse game to, kind of knowing that, okay, the number of VR gamers overall is still relatively small compared to mobile and PC. And, the number of horse gamers, enthusiasts that also own VR headsets is going to be a very small fraction of that. So that was part of where, in designing and positioning the game and how we've chosen to market it, part of what we've tried to do is saying, okay, well, we probably know that anybody that's a horse enthusiast is going to pick this game up if they have VR hardware. But really what we need to capture and who we need to intrigue is the VR enthusiasts, the person who has the hardware and who's looking for new and interesting experiences. And that was also kind of what helped coax us into the market by saying, well, it's a tough marketplace, but actually a horse game is something that VR players haven't really seen before in a fully realized way. So, we've had a combination of both horse lifestyle enthusiasts in the VR marketplace pick the game up, as well as VR enthusiasts who are just looking to get the most out of their headsets. So it's been a great mix to sort of see both those groups of people gravitate towards the game.
Now, one thing that I think has been a saving grace in that regard is that Rival Stars Horse Racing is a very gender-neutral game. Basically, unlike a lot of horse games, it doesn't lean heavily into the cutesy heart and drenched in pink we so often see. As a result, when they did aim the game towards this market space that did not necessarily have those horsey nerds, it was visually more accessible to people. When games are so heavily drenched in pink and flowers, it puts people off who simply don't like the aesthetic or who might feel like the game is simply not aimed at them. The more neutral games are, the easier it is for a wider range of players to pick it up. Mario goes on to explain how they had to change Rival Stars from its original concept specifically due to horse girls.
Rival Stars Horse Racing was leaning more towards, during development, that kind of racing enthusiast, maybe that kind of sports gamer that leans generally more male. But when we put the game into soft launch, we definitely saw that there was a heavy women-leaning horse enthusiast crowd that was really excited by the authenticity that we were bringing to the space as well. So to some extent, we've been playing kind of catch up ever since, trying to balance out the game in that sense. But I think it turned out in our favor that we didn't have a game that was sort of immediately patronizing to the audience. Everything is not just pink and covered in flowers just because, hey, that's what people want, and some people do want that, but you don't necessarily need that. We've found that we've been able to kind of attract and keep a wide audience because we've focused on the stuff that matters, which is that kind of authenticity and the quality of the experience, the breadth and depth of the experience, rather than sort of trying to pander or patronize the audience.
So, technically, Horse Girls hijacked Rival Stars horse racing. I am absolutely loving this. But one thing that I did sort of love about the VR headset was all the details. So the next question sort of leaned into that. The details in VR, horses leaning into pats, reacting to scratches, look so good, and I've seen so many positive reactions to it. How did your team capture that? Did you send the developers to Horse Camp?
Yeah, I guess we have a number of people across the studio who interact with horses or ride horses, as you would hope. Not everybody does that, and I guess not everybody has to do that to be able to contribute to a horse-focused experience. But that was certainly one of the things that we tried to do here. Was before we had written kind of any line of code, and this is maybe a good point to note, that rather than kind of port anything, we sort of started this whole project from scratch, at least from a programming perspective. And so it was important to kind of get the team out to a horse ranch, interacting with the horses, feeding horses, patting horses, and probably also not very well known is that actually Pickpock is across both New Zealand and Medellin in Colombia, where we've had a studio for the last 3 years as well. And it was actually our team in Colombia did the majority of the work for this VR version. So that team there got out to their local horse facilities and was able to get up close and personal with horses, and that's a great place to kind of start when you can experience that connection for yourself for those members of the team that hadn't had that before. Part of the experience we knew that we could bring to the table beyond what the mobile version and the PC version have is that kind of more tactile connection, that more personal relationship with the horse. In the mobile version, you're looking at a little screen, there's a horse on there and that's your horse. And but it's a little bit different when you get to walk around the horse and feed the horse and like feel like you're touching the horse and the horse is reacting to that touch. So we knew that was important, and making sure the developers kind of understood that that kind of very tactile personal connection was very important.
I really highly encourage you guys to go and look at some more of the reactions from players who played this game. You really do get to pet a horsey, and it is turning players into gooey messes. Although players are enjoying it, it is still a VR game, which brings up the next issue. Motion sickness is a huge issue in VR. In your devlog, you mentioned that you had to find ways to minimize motion sickness. According to studies, women are actually far more susceptible to motion sickness than men, and seeing as a large portion of your community are women, was this one of the driving factors in ensuring your players would be comfortable?
The big thing that really helps, as it happens, is one of the problems with motion sickness and what causes that is where you feel like you're being pulled along or pushed along, and your body isn't having the sensations associated with that movement, and so your brain and your body get very confused very quickly, and that's why you feel sick. But when you have a visual reference point, that is what actually makes, for example, riding in a car or riding on a bike a lot easier. And you don't feel motion sick when you're riding in a car unless you're actually looking down. And again, you're confusing your body because your body feels a sense of movement without your eyes and your senses kind of registering why that's happening. So actually the fact that you're riding on a horse and you can see the head of the horse in front of you fools your brain into thinking, okay, I'm moving, but I'm moving because I'm sitting on top of something. So your brain kind of adjusts and goes, oh, okay, I know what this is. So that plays a big part. There are places where we've still had challenges in terms of things like jumping, for example. So you can get a little bit of a stomach twinge in jumping in the game. We are looking to do another couple of little fixes around that, a little couple of tricks that will make that less problematic. That's an example where if your horse jumps virtually, you aren't getting the feedback that you would normally get in real life that says, hey, you're now about to move in a different direction. Riding along is fine because you have that reference point, but jumping is a little bit weird because you don't get the warning that it's kind of coming, at least from your senses in your body in terms of movement. So yeah, the place that we start when it comes from to any of our games is really, there's going to be a wide range of people with a wide range of senses and experience and capability and knowledge about this subject. We need to do the testing and work out how to make the game accessible to as many people as possible, comprehensible, comfortable, tune that difficulty as best we can. And if you can do that, that means that you capture kind of the biggest audience possible, and you're not turning away people immediately because they've immediately hit something that's too hard, or they start feeling sick, or they don't understand what they're going to do next. So usability, accessibility, comfort, those are things that we really value across all of our development.
It is absolutely fascinating to me to hear how developers are approaching VR, because when first-person shooters first landed, people did get motion sickness from that, and companies had to figure out ways to stop players from feeling that sickness. If players got sick while playing your game, they wouldn't keep playing. Over time, certain rules and baselines became the basis for game development to specifically prevent sickness. VR, of course, has its own unique challenges, but it seems to have come a long way since its debut, just like desktop games. Now, Mario explains a little on this through a secret project, which I am very curious about.
I mean, we're sort of taking things to the next level, and I'm sort of diverging into projects that aren't based on horses here and with something we haven't announced. But one of the things we have in development is mixed reality title, which has a whole lot of other different challenges. But we're actually purposely doing a lot of things to kind of confuse and disorient people in a way which is beneficial to actually selling the immersion of the experience. So yeah, when you start really getting into the super detail of how the brain and your senses kind of perceive reality, in an effort to then distort people's reality and make them think they're somewhere where they actually aren't, then that gets really exciting as a game developer. So we're a long way off from announcing that particular game, but that we're doing some cool stuff in that space, and we're glad that we've been able to kind of dip our toe initially with Rival Stars Horse Racing VR.
Now, the next question that I wanted to ask was a little bit about the gameplay. So next question is, in the mobile and desktop versions, you had to keep your horse at its favorite position to fill up the sprint bar. In the VR edition, this was changed. Now the good position is not as important anymore. Basically, if you move the reins, it'll fill up the bar just as well. This seems like a sacrifice of immersion, because in real races, the favorite position is a very important part of racing. Why was this change made?
That one was really about fun when it came down to it. Fun and keeping the user kind of occupied. I think part of the challenge of we had when we were sort of looking at some of those mechanics was, well, how do you communicate where the player should be in the pack? And it's easy when you're sort of behind the horse and you have that third person view where you can more easily see where the horse is positioned relative to all the horses around you. But it gets a lot harder in the bustle when you're actually in the middle of that pack of horses. And we just found really that it just wasn't as fun being trying to lean into that kind of more strategic way of gameplay that the other versions of the game have, versus just kind of leaning into, let's just be making the player be doing something all the time proactively. And, we just found that getting the players' adrenaline up and keeping them occupied and having them thinking about building and managing their sprint meter while they're sort of looking around at the same time, ultimately that's what it came down to, is it was just more fun this way.
I do like the answer. The fact of the matter is that games need to be fun. Realism is absolutely a type of fun players can have, but leaning into it too much can potentially hurt a game rather than better it. Now the next question is, will VR eventually get all the breeds and features of desktop or mobile? And of course vice versa. Could VR's horse care mechanics come to other platforms?
Yeah, so that's something when we're talking about new features and content, or even existing features and content for any of the now 3 sort of different versions of the game that we have, there is always that question of, is this something that can potentially cross-pollinate into another version? And there was the thought that, yes, we're kind of creating new animation, new functionality around the bonding, feeding, horse interaction stuff that might initially come back into the Steam version, might bubble all the way to the mobile version. There's years and years worth of content that potentially can make its way in the other direction, and I guess we've seen a lot of that content move from mobile to the Steam version over time. Not always as quickly as people would hope sometimes, but we've talked a little bit about that in the past too. That there is a commercial reality where certainly the mobile version of the game is the revenue driver of the franchise, and that's where we tend to germinate and lead with content. And Steam has some of its own stuff that's only related to the Steam version, but we're hoping to kind of catch up a little bit, which maybe I can get into a little bit later, but over the course of this year. I will say, and this is kind of getting ahead to one of your other questions perhaps, the VR version looks like it will do well enough over time, but it's fair to say that if we're looking at it from a commercial perspective, the ranking in terms of our priority is going to continue to be mobile, then Steam, then the VR version, as you might expect. So we're being very deliberate and trying to think about what specifically we're wanting to invest in the VR version right now, and what kind of features and content will help elevate that particular experience. And then over time we'll see what happens, bringing some of those particular features back into the other version. But I will say probably the Steam version team is getting a little bit busier at the moment. So, and there's already a long list of kind of content and features that they need to bring in from the mobile version into the Steam version. So it may happen over time. That particular example isn't on the roadmap to kind of cross-pollinate into versions outside of the VR edition at this stage, but it is a conversation that has been had. It's just a matter of prioritizing and bandwidth over time.
One point that I think myself and players tend to forget is that desktop version and the mobile version are technically vastly different games, in that the type of development you're going to be putting into the mobile will be much different than what you're going to be putting into the desktop. During the interview, I brought up the point that the VR feels the most divorced from the other two. It feels far more like its own thing, where the desktop and mobile share a great number of similarities. I thought that perhaps the VR won't be seeing as much demand for the same features, but Mario had a slightly different thought on it.
There is a level of both expectation and confusion about why features and content don't necessarily flow a little bit more freely and in a more timely manner between desktop and mobile, and vice versa. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. There's a lot of very superficial similarities that make it feel like the same game, but obviously they monetize very differently. They you approach it very differently. The progression is all different. There are exclusive features on both sides. And, that's something that there's a lot of work that actually happens, particularly on mobile, that just doesn't make sense in the context of the Steam version. So yeah, I think, there's a lot of similarities. It's definitely, there's a much bigger gap between the VR edition and both the desktop edition and the mobile version. So there is content that can flow. It is a very different experience, very different progression systems, very different reward systems, very different needs from a technical content perspective. So, there are some big challenges there. And as you can imagine, trying to maintain the frame rate that we need to on standalone VR headset hardware is very challenging with even the mobile versions of the content. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges there. We'll see how things evolve over time. We're not at the point where VR edition players are demanding features be and content be ported across just yet. But maybe give that time when the new toy aspect wears off and people want more. And from our perspective, I think you can view these things as complaints in one sense, but really our interpretation of people saying, hey, when are we getting these features and content is people saying, we want more, we want to play this more. And it's crazy to us when we look at some of the statistics in the Steam dashboards, developer dashboards, where we can see players have played for hundreds and hundreds of hours in that game. And, that compares to some of the deepest, most expensive RPGs and even MMOs that people might engage with. So from our perspective, the fact that people want more and there's this insatiable appetite is actually a really great signal. And that's why we have been continuing to support the desktop version, for example, for as long and as much as we have.
Mario further goes on to make the absolutely fair point that in spite of all the updates and changes to the base game on desktop, they have actually never changed the price for the game. This is not really normal for single-player games in general. Usually these types of updates are sold as DLC. So yeah, this is absolutely a bonus for Rival Stars, and I think it absolutely worth mentioning. But the next question is, you guys used voice actors this time around. This is so cool. It really adds another layer to the game. What made you decide to make this available specifically for VR? And also, will desktop and mobile be getting the same treatment?
I think this was something, again, that just kind of came out of building the experience and then just kind of getting a feel for what was lacking or what was a missed opportunity. And the game as it stands on mobile and PC is very menu heavy, very text heavy. There's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of icons, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of text. We knew that that we needed to do something very different for the VR edition. It was really important for us to kind of find ways to kind of convey information and without kind of overloading the screen with just pop-ups and that sort of thing. So VO and having voiced dialogue and narrative just felt a way to not only to convey something to the player, but it also feels more immersive. The flip side of the fact that we have VO is that you don't really see the characters that you're talking to either, but they feel real because you're talking to them. Whereas, in the mobile and desktop version, you see them, but you're not hearing them. As it happens, we haven't had much of a conversation yet about using voice in either the mobile version or the desktop edition. We have got the race commentary, of course, that adds so much to the racing experience, so much that people don't even talk about it because it's just there and it just feels right. It's an opportunity, and I think it's fair to say that we will be supporting this franchise for years to come. We're constantly looking at how we can improve the experience, expand the experience, deepen the experience. So maybe voices will appear in the desktop edition. A little bit harder in mobile, where the size of the download is a really big factor in the success of the title and the opportunity to stay installed on someone's phone. So a little bit harder there potentially, but it is a question we should be asking about the desktop edition for sure.
This is again a great example of how differently developers approach different gaming platforms. Each have their own challenges, and a decision that makes sense for one won't always make sense for another. I would personally love voice acting in the desktop, but I do sort of understand that at this current stage, the amount of voice recording required to fill up all the voice acting on the desktop version might be a tall order. As for the mobile, as Mario mentioned, the size of the game determines on whether the game will be downloaded. So adding voice acting could potentially make the game too big to be downloaded easily. A lot of mobile downloads hinges specifically on size. Now, the next question that I asked was, what's next for Rival Stars VR? Any surprises you can tease?
I think we're still in the stage of sort of working out exactly what the roadmap is. Some things that we're working on at the moment. I think again, we're needing to make sure we prioritize our developments in the right way. So I don't think we will be having huge leaps in content or features in the near future, but at least some smaller stuff coming that we think people will enjoy and that will create a couple of new dimensions to the experience. But yeah, I think people will be happy about some of the more immediate ads, but that's part of the process, is working out where people want us to go from here, as well as marrying that with where we think we should be going from.
Finding a balance between giving players what they want and making a game that is still within the vision of the developer is always a difficult one. Rival Stars has been finding a good balance between the two, at least I feel, and Mario expanded.
There's always requests for all sorts of things and levels of realism and depth that if people really thought about it, they're like, why would I even want that? Because I don't like that in real life. Why would I want that aspect of my hobby in this stylized version of my hobby that's kind of celebrating the fun parts and kind of minimizing the other more negative aspects of any hobby. And I think the other thing that is interesting as well, when we sort of look at some of the commentary that's out there and assumptions that are being made around when the communities of various horse games are trying to work out not only what they individually want, but what the community wants and what the community is doing. And I think it's very easy to get an impression from a small number of people within a given horse community for a given horse game, being very vocal about a particular thing, whether it's a negative or a positive thing, that can actually be a very distorted view on what the reality actually is. And I guess what's interesting when we look at it from a developer's perspective, our community and that community engagement is very important. But that's only one of the tools that we have to kind of understand what it is that people want and what they're actually doing. And we're very proactive with doing regular community surveys and really drilling down into the specifics of things. We have our analytics team kind of analyzing that actual data, because people say they do particular things within the game, but actually what they do a lot of the time can be very different as well. And we've seen it. We have that kind of telemetry and market intelligence data on even our competitor products. There's actually some that consumers, or shall we say horse market enthusiast analysts, can get access to that can give a deeper understanding as well. And you sort of see a competitor that might change their monetization strategy and the community goes, well, this is terrible, all the players are going to leave. But what you actually find is that, you can see that, well, nobody really left, and now that company is making 20% more with that particular game. So yeah, it's very hard to kind of work out on just what the conversation is, what it is that people want and what they're going to do and what they value and what they prioritize. You actually have to do a lot more work than that, looking at the data, doing the surveys, really drilling down into things, analyzing the marketplace, to really work out what the right path to go is. And it's complicated.
We often push for things that aren't always realistic in the game that we want them in. I have found myself doing this upon occasion, and when we don't get the thing, we get upset. Now, that is not to say we shouldn't be vocal. We should always be willing to tell developers when we are unhappy and be willing to have these discussions. That feedback is extremely important. And I feel that one of the reasons that Rival Stars is so successful is because they do listen to not only the statistics, but also to the community. And I think Mario had a very good way of putting this.
It's important to give players in the community the space to give you the feedback and to put forward how they feel about things, and to not be automatically defensive about it. And I think that's something that, again, is important in how we engage. Is you will have seen other developers can get very defensive to the point of sometimes becoming litigious about things, and that's just not our style. And sometimes that means that there is misinformation rattling around, or a level of negativity in our community about a particular way that we've approached things or changed things, or whatever it might be. But again, that's your community being negative is just a sign that they really care about your game.
Yeah.
And understanding when your community is upset about something and why they're upset about something is important to then be able to work towards a place where you can either correct that misinformation, roll back a change that you've made, push forward with something so that a better solution than what you put out there is realized. So yeah, that I think good or bad, you need to give the community the space to say what they want to say.
Listening to your community is, of course, a double-edged sword. It's one of the reasons why I advocate so hard against announcing your game before you have a clear vision in mind. You need the feedback from players, but you also need the breathing room to let your game turn into something before you allow others to change it into something they want. But I'm getting off topic. The next two questions went into broader ideas, starting with, you guys have stayed in top form despite the gaming industry's dip. How have you managed to do so? And how has it affected you?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not news that the last few years for the games industry have been very tough. That's been true for a lot of different industries, but for the games industry specifically, across the board, doesn't matter what platform you develop for, what type of game, what audience. It's been hard. There's been a lot of layoffs, a lot of studio closures, a retraction in investment, and a reduction in consumer spending. And a lot of that was driven sort of post-COVID economic slump. And I think we certainly saw that ourselves across all of our games. This kind of downward pressure on downloads, on spending, and then that has a knock-on effect to the ability to monetize games through in-game advertising and that sort of approach. So it's definitely been tough in that we've been fighting headwinds to try and not only maintain our audience and maintain our revenue, but somehow kind of try to push ahead and actually grow both of those things. And it's been arguably great for horse gamers, a little bit tougher being in the space that actually, there are a lot of great high quality attempts at kind of coming into the horse gaming space as well. So, there's been a few contenders kind of entering, and that has an impact too. If the pie is smaller because consumer spending is down, more players in that pie from a developer's perspective makes it harder to kind of keep your piece. So yeah, it's been tough, but I think kept our head down. We've tried to stay true to our vision. We've really doubled down on the strengths of the studio and those games in the studio that are really driving our success. And as it happens, Rival Stars Horse Racing is one of those games that is at the core of the studio's success. So continuing to focus on quality of service, quality of experience, I think has managed to help us survive, certainly. I'm not sure I'll say thrive, because it's very hard for anybody to be thriving right now in this environment. But certainly we feel like we're making progress, and we're thinking not only about the next few years of Rival Stars Horse Racing, but what else is coming that we're wanting to do in this particular space for this particular audience that will kind of kick things up to the next level. So the last few years have been hard, but we think there's a bright future ahead, and part of the challenge of getting through the next few years is continuing to understand where and how we need to adapt, and how we raise the quality, how we create even deeper connections with our community, how we raise the level of understanding and information quality that we have as well. So
after considering, I also believe another reason for the game's success is its niche market in the Western gaming sphere. Despite horse racing being a widely beloved sport, we don't have a modern game that captures that feeling of horse racing at all. For a while, we had the G1 Jockey series and the Gallop Races series, both from Japan. And Japan also has the Winning Post series, but not a single one of those recent games have ever been translated to English and made for the Western market. So Rival Stars Horse Racing neatly settles into a market that has been hungry for a game of this genre. Next question. Players sometimes feel that an influx of horse breeds can be a sign that there is less gameplay and more cosmetics. Why are you deciding to add so many horse breeds into your game?
One reason is that it was something that was highly demanded by the player base. I guess maybe if some players are feeling like there's too many, maybe the answer is be careful what you wish for. But I think for us, especially as the game has expanded well beyond that kind of flat track racing place where it started to encompass more equestrian and kind of casual riding elements to the game. We have seen that opportunity to kind of offer more horses, more horse breeds into the mix, and it was something that we felt could not only deliver interesting content in terms of aesthetics and playing to the interests of those people who are engaging with the game because they're horse lovers, and they all have their favorite breeds. They want to be able to see and interact with those in the game. But there is a gameplay aspect, both from a tactical and strategic perspective in there too, around what we've been trying to do with the breeds trait system and how that interplays with the different types of competition that you can engage with in the game. So I think part of where people have felt that the new breeds haven't quite hit the mark is because the game is still quite heavily skewed towards that flat racing heritage. And that's one of the things that we'll be addressing actually over the coming months is kind of building out, and I guess we're referring to it in the development team as backfilling kind of more content into cross country, into steeplechase and continuing to build out the kind of newer show jumping aspect of the game that has been available in kind of an early prototype phase in the mobile version. So yeah, we will be kind of balancing out the things you can do in the game, and that will make some of the breeds we've already released feel more usable, more competitive for those that are engaging with the live events. As new breeds come in, it will sort of feel like there's a place not only from an aesthetic perspective but also from a gameplay perspective for every kind of breed to sit alongside the other breeds. So it's something that we've been thinking about for a while, and we're sort of getting to that place where it all kind of fits a little bit better together, a little bit closer to what we originally intended. That we haven't quite had that balance in place that we've needed to, but we're almost there. So stick with us, and hopefully people will get a better understanding of kind of what the intention was. I will say that we have been relatively quick to release a lot of breeds over the course of the last year in particular, and some of that feedback is, oh my gosh, like I've only just finished kind of breeding and training and leveling up my last breed drop, and now you've got another one in front of me. So we're conscious of that too, and we're also wanting to be introducing content at a pace that players have a reasonable time frame to engage with before they feel like they're being overwhelmed. And we've listened to that too, and the pace of new breed introductions will be slowing off a bit. So I think between seeing that more of that kind of balance coming into the game between racing, steeplechase, cross country, and show jumping becoming kind of its own thing, that pace of breed introductions kind of slowing down a little bit, that should hopefully meet kind of the expectations of players a little bit more.
A lot of breeds have been released for sure, but it is nice to hear that they are planning on making the horses feel less trivial and give them something a bit more substantial. This is, I believe, a wider issue with horse games, not just rival stars. Adding a lot of breeds is fine, but breeds are, in my opinion, a lot like guns in FPS games. A shotgun does not work the same as an AK-47, and to justify both, you have to give them different abilities and playstyles. Otherwise, what's the point of having all these guns? Next question. Why do you guys use AI in your promotional art? What is the thought process behind this? AI has been known to really hurt artists, so why does a company who can more likely afford an artist use AI for its art?
I guess if I can flip that round, because I know where that question is coming from, but I do have a lot to say on it. But if I can ask the question and flip it around on you initially, for that particular example, and I think we're talking about the same example of the Triple Peaks promotional for the desktop version, what makes you so sure it was AI art?
Okay, so there are a few things that sort of made it stand out. Is the okay, so the illogicalness of it. That's something that I've picked up with AI. It sort of can't figure out specific things. So I do understand, like, it is a line to walk to accuse someone of using AI. So I can maybe see where you're going with this.
So I immediately was like, because I could see where you're coming from, and I think I've had my AI detective hat on when I see certain things from other developers too, because it is a huge issue, huge opportunity that a lot of the industry is wrestling with. But I will share my screen.
Oh no!
To show you something.
I'm going to be shamed. I'm going to be shamed.
So,
I have been shamed.
So, and it was interesting actually because we were like following some of the commentary and the comments in that particular video where there were two other artists, and one was like, "Oh, this really looks like a photo paint over to me," and then the next person was like, No, I am an artist, and I can tell this is not a photo paint over. But I can confirm, yes, it is indeed a photo paint over, and I think you can see the
I can.
uh,
I
a
can.
loose strap on the front around here, and then the non-connecting strap up here, and so look, I will say. There's definitely a lot of AI and usage of generative AI out there, and what's exciting and scary, depending on your perspective and the use case, is it's becoming harder and harder to tell.
Yeah,
And the
that's
difference between, in this particular example, it's fairly common, and actually we use it for a lot of a common method which we use for a lot of our promotional material is we buy stock photo imagery, and then we paint over it to kind of pull it into the general look and feel and kind of the color space of the game. And so this is an example of that. So people may still have a perspective of like, well, it's not AI art, but you just traced over a photo. But for a promotional bit of art that is literally going to be out there for a fleeting amount of time, there's only so much we want to invest versus where we're doing high fidelity concept art that is going to sit on the Steam store or used in posters or whatever it might be. I definitely understand that there are a whole lot of issues around the use of AI in games that are legal, ethical, moral, the quality perspective, but there is a level of inevitability that is creeping in, and you're starting to see AI tools kind of encroaching in so many vectors that it's actually a lot of work almost to avoid using AI. The responsibility that developers have, I think, is how can you approach it in a way which is not only legal, and there's a lot of challenges there, but ethical, and it's not about replacing or avoiding talent, but you're actually leveraging it in a way which can unlock the potential of people. And I will say, when it comes to the use of things like AI tools or AI empowered tools, and there's a lot of interesting things that Photoshop can do now through the use of AI, and Adobe is trying to approach things in an ethical way by using copyright cleared and artist compensated AI training, that those tools really allow artists to work quicker and get to their creative vision faster. And so I will say, at the point where we might be using AI and generative AI a lot more openly within the studio, I still want an artist to be driving those tools, because an artist has the eye, the experience, language, the ability to get the most out of whatever those tools might offer. So I think there's a lot that we need to be careful about how AI is approached and integrated and utilized. At this point, as you will have seen, we're not using generative AI to be outputting consumer-facing content, but we are using various AI tools in part of our production management documentation, curation, and proofreading, and some ideation, and there are aspects of that. And we feel that we've taken a legal and ethical and moral approach to it in terms of the vendors that we're using, and making sure we're using kind of cleared and compensated data sets. Human creativity will still lead the way there. There is a future there, I think, over the horizon where again, I think society is going to have to wrestle with a whole lot of challenges when AI becomes smarter and more creative than humans.
Well, I got some egg on my face, maybe a chicken or two. Yes, I absolutely got this one wrong, and I'm very sorry that I did so. But in a way, I'm also glad. It is actually nice to be proven wrong about something like this. I don't want to believe the worst of developers nor companies. I don't think anyone does, and the fact that Rival Stars could so easily do so was a breath of fresh air. But to cover my bases, I did reach out about a second image which was also making the rounds. And again, it was a paint over. He also made it clear that the photographers are also getting paid. So everyone wins. But in the end, spotting AI images is absolutely getting harder, as pointed out by Mario, and as proven by my mistakes. That doesn't mean we shouldn't stop trying to spot them, but it does mean that we should be more cautious, absolutely myself included. I'm going to edit the original video and make a pinned comment to ensure people are aware of the mistake. But let's get into the final question. One of the best parts about Rival Stars is the community. I think you guys have cultivated a very happy community. What advice would you give to up-and-coming horse game developers to ensure their own communities thrive?
Yeah, I think part of it really just comes down to valuing that feedback and valuing that interaction, regardless of whether that interaction is positive or negative. It's going to tell you something about your game and how your game is landing with the particular audience. And I think when it comes to an audience like the horse gamer community, you're dealing with a very passionate community that is willing to give new games the benefit of the doubt. It's very optimistic, is very hopeful, has been let down time and time again, unfortunately. It is willing to contribute in terms of ideas and being constructive. And there's that real opportunity to tap into that for this audience in particular, where we want to make the best horse game ever, and the community wants us to make the best horse game ever. And there's a partnership to be had there, but you have to value both sides of the partnership, and getting defensive, trying to shut things down, trying to block discussion where that discussion might be negative. Negative discussion isn't problematic until it becomes personal or hateful. You still need to hold people to community standards in terms of attacking each other. Attack ideas, not people.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need to let those negative discussions happen. You need to be able to face that criticism without taking it personally. I think that's true for horse gamer community, and you can generally apply that across genres, across audiences, across platforms. I will say that the horse gamer community tends to lean towards being more constructive and more positive and more optimistic, and give you more benefit of the doubt than a lot of other gaming communities out there. So it's a real privilege to be developing for this community, and it's not a privilege that should be squandered.
I think this is probably one of the most important things to consider when tackling really any project with the community. Without the community, you wouldn't have the privilege of making your product, and without the product, the community won't have the privilege of being able to complain about it. It's a two-way street, and it comes down to leaving space, not just demands or restrictions. But that was the interview with the Rival Stars Horse Racing CEO. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you all so much for watching.